Once upon a time, stories of fantasy. People suffering with OCD aren't living a fantasy. Even though there are a lot of myths that go around obsessive compulsive disorder, their stories are real. These are stories from the OCD side. Real people, real stories, brought to you by FamilyOCD.com and InvisibleWheelchair.com. We want your story. Go to InvisibleWheelchair.com and contact us to tell us your story here. OCD is real. OCD treatments are real. OCD recovery is real. And so are these stories. Ginger McGee is a Savannah native and currently lives in Pooler, Georgia with her husband, 2 sons, and 5 rescue animals. When she's not writing, you can find her in creative space Paper Soup Studio, where she does everything from abstract painting to embroidery. Her books include a collection of poems called All These Things, detailing her struggles with depression and anxiety. Her book He's Not Broken, telling her journey through her son's OCD and Tourette's, and a yet-to-be-released young adult novel called In Between Worlds, based on a well-known Savannah ghost. Watch the trailer for He's Not Broken book and find out more about Ginger at www.gingermcgee.com. Her books are available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. So let's get to that story about her son now. So Ginger, thank you so much for being here for the stories from the OCD side, which is part of the Invisible Wheelchair podcast. I welcome you and looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing my story.
Well, let's actually get right to that. I love to share people's story because I believe it's an inspiration for others, and I'm sure your story is going to be one that will help somebody along the way. So good. Let's just go ahead and get your story going.
Okay, great. Well, first I'll start by saying my son is 23 now. He was diagnosed first with Tourette's at the age of 6, severe, but then that was followed by the diagnosis of severe OCD at 8. And the way we got to that point is very interesting. It's a story in and of itself. We knew that he had OCD tendencies because that's sort of a tag-along condition with Tourette's. Most people who have Tourette's tend to have OCD, and they fuel one another. So it makes it very confusing as to how to deal with it. But he had several OCD tendencies, most of which were directed at his Tourette's, as far as the number of times he had to tic. And so that's how we knew his OCD. But then it began to manifest into one of his more severe things was to put small objects in his mouth. He had to get that sensation in his mouth. That's about the only way he could explain it to me. And when he was 8, we were getting ready to head out to a playground, and he came running in. I was getting my younger son at the time, who was like 6 months old. I was getting him ready. Jake came running in, grasping his throat, just hit this super terrified look on his face. And he's yelling and having trouble breathing. And he's telling me that he swallowed something. So what had happened is he had a Mario 1-Up keychain, and which winds up being an interesting part of the story that I'll get to. So he had put it in his mouth, and as he was trying to push it back out, he accidentally wound up swallowing. Now the keychain, I mean, it was a sizable keychain. It was a mushroom shape, and it had sharp edges, a metal keychain. So he's holding his throat and terrified. I'm equally terrified. And he said he can feel it stuck in his throat. So we immediately get everything together. My husband works at home. I grabbed him. We take Jake to the ER, and it's lodged in his esophagus. They immediately did an x-ray. They see that it's lodged in his esophagus, and they're going to have to do surgery. which immediately makes Jake's OCD and his tics worse. He's panicked. I'm panicked. Everybody's panicked. Unfortunately, and fortunately, the surgeon was not available. He was on his way. So by the time the surgeon got there, they decided to take another x-ray just to get a better idea of the location of it. Miraculously, it had passed. I don't know how, because like I said, it was a sizable keychain and with metal edges, and there was no damage. It had just passed. They told us to keep an eye out for it. We never saw that thing. So we like to joke, I don't know if you're a Mario fan or if your kids are, but a 1-up is an extra life. And so we like to joke and say that my son has an extra life now, since it has never been resolved.
Okay.
That's the funny part of the story.
Yeah.
But it was after that we realized that it could potentially be a life-threatening situation for him. And prior to that, I was not a big fan of medication. I had gone in, and fortunately we had a psychiatrist he was not pushy about that. I mean, the option was on the table, that was left up to our discretion. But once the situation happened with the keychain, we realized that he needed to be on medication, because it had become dangerous. So they put him on Zoloft. And because he was so young, it had to be liquid version because he didn't know how to swallow pills yet. So that was $300 a month for the Zoloft.
Now he could swallow a keychain, but he couldn't swallow the pill. Interesting.
Never
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That. No, that's quite funny. I've never thought about that. Yeah, I need to get on to him about that. But yeah, so, and within a couple days, we had seen a difference in the severity of his OCD, because prior to that, he was, telling me that he didn't want to live, that, he didn't understand why all this was happening to him. And so the Zoloft helped with the OCD and it lifted his mood. So it was a lifesaver, no doubt. So that's the story of his diagnosis with OCD. He did continue to put small things in his mouth, or to have the urge to put the small things in his mouth. And because of that, he was a big fan of Legos, as most little boys are. So at one point I had to go into his room, and it was a heartbreaking day. I had to treat his room like he was a toddler again and get rid of small objects. And he came in when I was doing that, and his heart was broken. But he had found some Legos that he still had. And I walked in his room one day, I was taking laundry, and he had his back to me, and he was playing with his Legos or whatever, and just looked so content. And, it just made me feel so good, because from the back, he just looked like your typical child, just playing and having fun. Then he turned around and looked at me, and he had taped his mouth shut. And it just broke my heart, but he had found a way to do what he loved to do. And it just, still thinking about that, I can see it so clearly right now. And it just shattered my heart, knowing that he had to deal with something like this and learn how to manage this invisible bully, which is what we always called it.
Yeah. Same.
So yeah.
We actually called it Voldemort.
Voldemort. Yeah, we tried to come up with a name, but he never settled on one, because we knew that they tell you, give it a name, But yeah, we was just the bully, the invisible bully.
This brings up a thought in mind. The Tourette's. Now, I've not had anybody on or really dealt with that much. I mean, I've worked with somebody with Tourette's, but it didn't have OCD around it, at least with the ones I had worked with, but nothing major. How, did they consider that a compulsion, or how did the Tourette's? I guess I need to kind of understand for myself, but also for my audience, is how Tourette's differentiates itself in an OCD situation. I don't know. Does that make sense? That kind of question?
It absolutely makes sense. And it's very, very tricky. This was a problem that we had, because when you have a child with Tourette's, Tourette's and OCD, they like I said earlier, they fuel each other. It's the OCD determines how many times you're going to need to tic, and if you interrupt, then he's got to start over. So it was just this constant battle, with his tics, and he had severe tics too. Most people know Tourette's as the cursing disease, but that is less than 10% of people with Tourette's. My son was punching himself in the stomach and, stretching his jaw as wide as he could till his face was bloody. It wasn't fun. It's not what people think, which is very frustrating, but that's another story. So we were told by the psychiatrist that with his tics, you can't ask him to stop doing that, because it's just like if I ask you to stop breathing, you can stop for a bit, you can hold your breath, but then once you get to catch your breath, you're going to take in a lot of breath. And just like with his tics, if he was asked to hold them, which of course we never did, there would just be this explosion afterwards. So with the Tourette's, that just had to happen how it happened. With OCD, we were told you can encourage him to fight that. So with Tourette's, you do not encourage him to fight it because it's not something they can help. But with OCD, you encourage them to fight it. But when they're together, it's like, what do? I don't know what to do. So we were faced with a lot of that when we weren't sure if it was a Tourette behavior or if it was an OCD behavior. So we kind of had to walk that line very carefully in asking him. And it was very tricky, very tricky.
Yeah, well, I mean, I understand the tricky lines. OCD is full of tricky lines, those fine lines. My daughter had a scenario with cigarettes, and we don't smoke. Nobody in my family smokes. I don't know where it came from, but it was a fine line of having, because it's really, cigarettes aren't good for you.
Right.
But to have her understand that it doesn't hurt you to step on one or be around one. So I understand the fine line. Where's the Tourette's now? Was that once you were able to kind of bring OCD down, did it also come down? And has that changed?
It's very interesting because, his case was very severe. I mean, he would tic thousands of times a day. I did a little math scenario and figured that out. And I mean, and they were painful tics. I mean, he was in pain with most of them. Usually when they hit puberty, it gets worse because you've got all the hormones going. Somehow, this is like that. Maybe it was that mushroom, that keychain that came into play. I don't know, but it faded. It faded into the background. The Tourette's did. In fact, I heard him the other day. He was sitting at the kitchen table eating, and I heard him ticking again. And it was just like, oh no, we're going back. We're going back. So it never goes away. But you wouldn't know it. I mean, you would have no clue that he has it. But what happened as a result of that, it was like, so Tourette's kind of took the backside, and OCD took that as an opportunity to go, hey, we've got the full stage now. Let's go. And that's what it did. And it got really, really bad. I mean, it was debilitating for him. He couldn't. He really didn't leave the house much. To touch anything. I mean, anything. He was wearing 5 pairs of surgical gloves to be able to eat a slice of pizza with a fork and a knife.
I can relate to that. We got to a place of no touch anything or us or even herself. So yeah, I understand that one. And having to hand her forks in a box so she could grab one fork out, eat it, and then throw it away, kind of thing. You've kind of mentioned how it's affected him, and I'd like to know if there's more to that. But how did it also affect the family?
Well, as you know, it's very stressful, and then we had the younger one in the mix. There's 8 years difference between the two, and so Nick, my youngest, he was always very concerned about Jake. He's just got a big heart. And so anytime Jake was ticking or his OCD was really bad, he was very concerned. But along with the Tourette's and the OCD, Jake would have rages, which you're probably familiar with some of that too. And over things that you couldn't explain. I mean, his shoelaces, the tension in the shoelaces was off, and he would have a meltdown, we were in New York one time, and foot traffic in New York, you keep moving, you do not stop.
Mhm.
And my son drops to the ground in the middle of foot traffic to fix his shoelaces, and everybody's like, boom, 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 just knocking up against us. But it affected my youngest because there were so many moments that I had to decide which child to comfort, which was heartbreaking because Jake was having a meltdown on the floor. Nick went up to him to see if he was okay, and Jake pushed him, not hard, but enough that it was, I needed to get Nick out of that environment because it was stressing him out too. So, and my husband was at home and he came out to be with Jake. But as I'm leaving, Jake is screaming at me, "Please don't leave me, mommy." And it's just heartbreaking because I had to make a decision,
Yeah.
So, it definitely affected the family. And with his rages and stuff, those were really, really hard to manage. And things were compounded by the fact that we were all home together all the time because my husband works at home. We homeschooled. So we were on each other constantly. And that was hard. I went on long drives quite a bit, like, I got to get out of here,
Yeah, you need to take those breaks. It's that
You
putting
do.
that oxygen mask on yourself before the kids kind of thing that I fully understand that,
Sure.
so so how did you, what different things did you do to get you to this, what we were calling the managed place, or where your son is recovered some, is
Right.
on the better side of it, let's put it that way.
Yeah. I would love to have some, this is what we did. This is exactly what we did. But um, a lot of it he did on his own. He's a strong kid, as most of these kids are. They don't give themselves credit for how strong they are.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but he was in therapy too. We did therapy for a while. He wasn't crazy about it, but it did wind up helping. One of his therapists did exposure therapy with him by putting lotion on his hands, which was like putting acid on Jake's hands. That was like very traumatic, but that did help. And that psychologist was very helpful with Jake, and I think got him to a point where he could better manage himself. But recently, the thing that has helped him the most is that he finally met somebody. And ironically, she's got Tourette's and OCD, and they didn't even know it. What are the chances of that, So he's happy, and that has helped manage it.
Is that a good combination? I'm not, that could be
Right?
that could be good in one way and not so good in another, I would imagine.
Yeah, her tics are very mild. He said he's only seen it a couple times, but it's so funny because they both have social anxiety, and so they're constantly reassuring each other.
Oh my, oh my.
It's constant. No, you're okay. Okay, I'm okay. You're okay. But I do think they're good for each other because they do get it. They understand each other's anxieties and everything. So
yeah, and maybe that's good exposure for both of them in some way,
Right. Could be.
What would you say to somebody that's running into the same, they're at the beginning stages of this, we both have been at that point, and what would your advice be to someone that's just getting into this stuff?
Biggest advice that I could give is to find your tribe. When Jake was diagnosed, I did not have a group of people who understood. Fortunately, I had very supportive family. That was never an issue, but having other mothers, other parents who know the exhaustion, the frustration, the anger, the disappointment, all of these emotions that are very uncomfortable to feel as a parent, and that don't mean that you love your child any less, but you do have these feelings because we're human. And I think that you need to have, a group if possible, but at least somebody who can say, I understand. Because to have somebody that does understand is probably the biggest relief that you could find. And that's what I did not have. I did not have that. I tried to start a group and nobody showed up. So I did my best to try to find my tribe. But I had to wind up creating it for myself. And so if you don't have a tribe, I suggest that you try to create one for yourself. And it doesn't have to be parents of kids with OCD. It can be parents of special needs kids. I mean, I think my problem was that I tried to create a Tourette's group. And what I should have done instead was try to create a special needs group, because we all feel similar emotions and have stories to share that would kind of encourage each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's all around anxiety. It's just different ways it shows itself or expresses itself, you know. So I understand that, because I mean, I don't know if you experience this. You know, we experienced that friends and family kind of dissipated. You know, they kind of spread themselves away from us. Not immediate, not my own kids and all that, but I'm talking about a little bit more extended family. They didn't know what to do. So they just kind of stayed away. You know, I don't know if you experienced some of that kind of distancing of people.
Yeah, we don't have much extended family, so I can't say that I experienced it that much. But I mean, but you did see a few friends kind of fall off, and it wasn't because, I think it's exactly what you said. It's because they didn't really know what to do with that,
Yeah.
and how to be around that. And I understand, because I mean, you know, I can't blame them for that. It's difficult, you know. Very.
Well, my wife and I always kind of talk about the fact, you know, when you, if you had cancer, if you have a sickness, you know, physical sickness, people bring casseroles and they come and do. If you get a mental kind of an issue, it just that doesn't happen, you know, and that's
Right.
why that's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing with this podcast, is that advocacy, to get it out there, get people to understand that it's really the time to kind of come and say, what can we do, you know, and to be there for people, you know, like you say, to have that tribe or people that will be there for you, to understand or whatever. So,
Yeah.
and I understand that you have written a book.
Yes, I have. It's actually the book that I wish that I had had when Jake was diagnosed. It was kind of me trying to create my own little tribe within myself, I guess, you know. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, it's a book, and the whole premise of the book is, what if your special needs child turns out to be the special child you didn't know you needed?
Oh, that's
And
good.
that's what Jake became for me, because I learned quite a bit from him. You know, I was kind of thrown into the fire, as we all are. So you know, you either learn or you just you fade away. But yeah, so that's the book, you know, that I hope can be that friend, that tribe for other people.
What's the name of the book?
It's called He's Not Broken: A Mother's Journey to Acceptance.
And I take it that can be, how can people find that book?
It's available on Amazon, Ginger McGee, and it's also available on barnesandnoble.com.
Okay. And I'll remind my audience, I'll have that up. I put this information up on the interview resources that I do. So
Okay, great.
I'll put your book up there,
Fantastic.
and make sure that people and look for it and all that good stuff. So,
Fantastic.
well, any last thoughts that you'd like to share, that you'd like, you know, maybe a message you'd like to get out in some way to my audience?
Um, wow, that's someone asked me this on another podcast, and I was like, whoa, I feel like I was supposed to come up with something really deep, really profound.
Yeah, yeah. Be the prophet here. You know, come out. You know, we expect something big from you now. Come on. You know.
Yeah. Oh, and I don't want to say anything trite. You know, hang in there. It's going to be okay.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you
Calm
know,
down. You know.
right, calm down. Catch your breath. I don't know. I mean, I just go back to find your people. You know, I mean, I
Yeah.
really think that you have to find your people. Otherwise, it's going to be a long, exhausting road. More so because it's already long and exhausting. But I think without your people, it's going to be difficult to navigate. I think you need those people to help you navigate your own emotions, because we're so busy dealing with our children and everything that they're going through. It's that whole oxygen mask thing that we forget. You need to find your people so that they can help you navigate yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if it does or not.
No, it's a lot of, I mean, you end up hitting a burnout place if you don't,
You really,
we had to pull back and go, wait a minute. We're living, all our energy is going to that child, and it's
right.
draining us. We had to pull back and say, we have to take care of ourselves.
Right.
No matter what, they're going to do the stuff they do, and
Right.
we're going to try to stop it, but we also have to take care of, so I fully understand that. That makes so much sense. So,
Yeah.
well, Ginger, it's been wonderful to talk with you, and I everything you said, I can feel it inside my bones, because it sounded very similar to, except the Tourette's part of it, but
Right.
all the other stuff was very much what we went through. So again, thank you so much for sharing that story, because like I said, I believe very much it'll be an inspiration, and I think your book will too.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love sharing my story, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that here.
So that is our story for this podcast. Remember, we want your story told here. If you want to tell us your success story, or just want to tell us where you're at, simply go to www.invisiblewheelchair.com, then click on the Tell Us Your Story on the top left side, or just click the Contact Don button on the right side towards the bottom. We want to give you a voice to your story. Until next time, keep working on your story for a happily ever after ending.